Thank you for coming. Anyone here from the West Coast? Thank you for waking up so early. This is the Upsizing and Modernizing with a Microsoft BI Stack and Fast Track Data Warehouse. Session DBI 320. My name is Ilan Weissman. This is Kevin Cornett. I've been with Steinmart for a little under 6 years, Kevin for a little under 1 year. Upsizing and modernizing with a Microsoft BI Stack and a Fast Track Data Warehouse. That's quite a mouthful. But for any of you who've been around data warehousing or BI long enough, you know that migrating to a new data warehouse platform or building a new BI program is a risky endeavor. But hopefully you'll see as we go through this that, at least for our organization, the risk of not moving forward was much higher than staying with what we have. As we go through the agenda, there are really 4 questions which we think are critical for us to answer. Why we changed platform, who or what was the driving force, how did we do it, and what was the results, what was the impact to our business. Towards the end, we'll discuss the implications of BI to the business that's not just technology-oriented, but one of the key factors for us is, beyond the technology, is how do we implement BI throughout the organization. We're going to give you a business overview right now. A few months ago, Microsoft came in and did a video study of the process just as we were finishing up. We're going to show you that. It's only a few minutes.
Steinmart is a off-price specialty retailer that operates about 265 stores in 30 states, primarily across the Southeast and Southwest, but we also have locations in the Midwest and up in the Northeast. We have one of the most incredibly loyal customers of any retailer in America. Business intelligence is important to Steinmart because as we continue to grow and try to improve our sales and our bottom line productivity, we needed a way to be able to give both our store management teams and our executive management teams access to greater information.
We're able to develop a solution a lot faster than we could in any other platform. I've developed in other platforms in the past for tens of years now, and the Microsoft BI Stack really accelerated our development cycle. So able to get that time to market, that agile development that no other stack can really offer.
Our legacy system does not keep up with our growing business. In our AS400 data warehouse, we hit a limitation in terms of data size. Our tables were becoming larger than 2 terabytes. There's a 2 terabyte limit on DB2 running on the AS400. And so that limited the not only amount of data in terms of what's available to the users, but a number of years of history that we could use for analysis. We needed a data warehouse that not only could handle 7+ terabytes of our existing data, but that would easily be able to scale up.
Cost is a major factor in any CIO's decision on the BI platform to pursue. I think using the Microsoft BI solution along with the HP Blade system, we were able to save money not only on hardware, but software and staffing. From an engineering standpoint, I was able to use the team I had in place. From a strategy and from a cost standpoint, we were able to combine our Microsoft BI initiative with a move to a more robust data center and a simplification of my hardware architecture. So we were able to deliver a better solution in a more secure facility and drive cost savings of almost $600,000 a year.
We selected our hardware vendor HP based on the collaboration between HP and Microsoft in defining the Fast Track reference architecture. Both HP and Microsoft and Steinmart worked closely to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of selecting type of disk, number of cores, processor speed. partitioning methodology so that we can maximize performance and make sure we met our SLAs. We are delighted in the current performance of our SQL Server reference architecture solution, our data warehouse and business intelligence. In the legacy system, loads took 14 to 20 hours. Currently, the load takes about 4 to 6 hours.
One of the important things for our BI strategy is to get the right data to the right people at the right time. And SharePoint has been great for us to be able to quickly deploy this to a much broader audience than we have been able to in the past.
The Microsoft SharePoint system includes a dashboard that allows the store manager to come in each morning and review his business from the day before. It allows him to look at it in division and department level and make adjustments accordingly.
We're very excited about Power Pivot and Excel services. What the BI stack will allow them to do is access an entire cube of millions and millions of rows, bring it into Excel, bring it into SharePoint.
Store managers have the ability to drill down into divisions, down into class and subclass, that allows them to make decisions and adjustments for the day that they can actually improve sales for the very next day. Deploying new functionality is extremely easy and simple. We can deploy new reports in a matter of minutes to all 265 stores.
With the Microsoft SharePoint dashboard, we get all the information we need in one spot. Prior to having the dashboard, we have to go to a lot of different resources to get that information. So when I get on the sales floor, what I do is effective because I have the information that I need to do my job.
So they can now look at what happened yesterday in their store and make actionable decisions today, whether they need to add signage, whether they need to have product placed in a different way, or whether they are just out of inventory and need to request additional inventory to drive business.
What the BI stack allows us to do is to, in a very quickly and efficient manner, deliver that information to the user in a self-service format. So they have the questions, they can answer the questions themselves and directly.
As a CIO, my job is to deliver the technology and the people to support the business's goal of becoming an information-based culture. The Microsoft BI solution, along with the rest of our strategic initiatives, really put the business in a place to achieve that goal and become an information-based culture.
All right, one of the things we have also recently launched is our e-commerce site. And as you see on the map, most of our stores are concentrated in the southeast, south, and southwest. We get a lot of customers that vacation, for example, down in Florida. They come from, let's say, Washington State. On our e-commerce sales, a lot of those sales are generated from vacationers who don't have stores nearby, and they're going to our e-commerce site and ordering. So some of the information that we're gathering through our new BIs is guiding us as to where we should open up new stores. One of the things that attracts our customers, so our target customer is female, aged 30 to 60. That's the largest, 80% of our customers. What attracts them to our group is, to our stores, are what we call opportunistic purchases. We don't do, our replenishment is not on a regular cycle. Our buyers, our merchandisers, look for those opportunistic buys that are not necessarily available in other chains. So from a customer perspective, it's kind of an adventure to go in the store to see what's new, what's there. We're going to talk now about the business drivers for the initiative. From a board and CEO perspective, the target was for us to become an information-based culture. So there are two drivers there. One from top down, board and CEO saying, I want to somehow infuse my strategic objectives with the day-to-day activities of the workers. How do we align those strategic objectives with information that the workers need to make decisions for today, tomorrow, for the coming week? From a bottom-up approach, IT and other folks were looking at the cost of how we run our technical infrastructure and seeing, are there more efficient ways, cheaper ways of running it. And then we'll talk about some of the SLAs, some of the challenges we're facing from the business. Kevin's going to talk about the BI side of it.
So you've probably seen a chart like this before. They're pretty typical. This one is from IDC, and it talks about kind of the flow of BI from where it was in the 70s with areas like static reporting all the way through to dashboards of the 90s, and now hopefully getting into pervasive BI. And if we look at where Steinmart was a year and a half ago, that's our white area, we're definitely down there in the static area, had data warehousing, and we're looking now at this point, we've moved into dashboards and visualization, and our next step is to get into more pervasive BI, which is where we're heading. So as we continue down this presentation, you'll see kind of those steps that we're taking and moving forward with the technology and some of the other components.
Some of our, what I describe as more of a business challenge, but it's also an IT challenge. The cost of running our data warehouse in terms of just hard dollars was about $600,000 a year. That's just in hardware and software maintenance cost to IBM. The iSeries administration cost, we needed a person just to run the box, do the IPLs, the updates. That was at about $150,000. And then backup costs were running at $50,000 a year. We were experiencing exponential data growth. Our processing times were increasing. And as Kevin said, the expectation on information to be delivered was also growing exponentially. In terms of the demands on IT and SLAs, so our daily loads were taking longer and longer, 1 to 3 hours every morning. And just to level set it, the data coming in from the stores arrived at corporate at around 2 a.m. in the morning. There's some operations going on there. So the data made available to the data warehouse could vary from 4 in the morning to as late as 6 or 7 in the morning. So with the load taking an hour or longer on the data warehouse side, information would not be available to our associates until really too late in the morning. Our weekly loads were taking 6 to 14 hours to run. Weekly reports were taking 3 to 8 hours to run into cache. And if you look at our executive and merchandising cycle, for the weekly ones, they needed the reports the executives needed reports up and ready by early Monday afternoon. The analysts, the merchandisers, planners, buyers, they needed to have that data first thing in the morning so that they could prepare it for the executives. Again, we didn't get the data from the stores until very early in the morning. If you look at these SLAs, we were behind in terms of having the information, the reports, the things that our folks needed in the morning. Another driver was that over the last 3 years, we've been replacing all of our core systems, basically ripping them out and either upgrading or completely replacing them. So our ERP, our point of sale, financial systems. This is an example of our point of sale system at the store. We had a Windows server that was hosting Linux, virtual OS, hosting DB2, and Oracle point of sale. In our migration to the next version of the point of sale system, we got rid of the Linux virtual. We got DB2 running on Windows. We put in WebSphere application server to host the point of sale application. But as we did that, we're now required to integrate that system with the rest of our systems in our data warehouse. With our existing iSeries, it was a huge challenge to try to integrate the iSeries with any other system. So as these systems were being changed, created a big load on IT to try to figure out how to integrate the new systems with not only the data warehouse, but all of our other systems. And so 2-3 years ago, with the economic downturn, every line of business, every business unit was required to look at what it's costing them what the costs are to run the operations. And from an IT perspective, we were given a smaller budget than what we had. We had to make some choices, either reduce headcount or reduce some systems. By looking at how we run the data warehouse, comparing it to how other organizations do their BI and their data warehousing, we realized that we were spending more than most other organizations. The cloud offerings that I have here is not necessarily Azure, but our executives on a daily basis are pelted with advertising about BI in the cloud, 5-minute BIs, much cheaper alternatives to what we were currently running. Let me describe a little bit more of what our legacy system was. We were running AS400 up to version 5, release 4. We went through about 3 years ago an upgrade from release 3 to release 4 of our data warehouse. That was a tumultuous operation, to say the least. We had to modify most of our SQL, and as you'll see later on, all of our ETL at the time, we had 150 plus custom ETL jobs. They all had to be revised. The management of an I-series, as I said before, requires extra people, and to go through releases, many times you have to upgrade the hardware. When you upgrade the hardware, your licensing model changes, so you need new licenses, more expensive licenses. This is showing you the data flow in our infrastructure. So we have a cash register, which is running the Oracle point of sale. We do have a Windows server hosting a receiving system with SQL 2000 and a controller server running the point of sale and the database. When the store closes at night, we FTP the transaction logs up to our I-series, which also hosts our merchandising, financial, and at the time Essbase. There, the data gets parsed. We then, from a data warehouse perspective, run our 150 plus custom RPG COBOL jobs to load the data warehouse. There are also thousands of other jobs which load data into some of the other systems. There's a scheduler, we call it a robot scheduler, which keeps tracks of all the jobs, the dependencies, and runs them. If at any times along the chain there's a delay or anything goes wrong, the entire schedule is at risk. A better picture probably would have been to show you a bowl of spaghetti, because that's what the infrastructure looked like. It's very hard to keep track of it and to operate. So at this point, I think you can see it's painfully obvious that why we needed to make a switch. We needed something that would integrate better, that would be easier, cheaper, faster. SSIS fits that model. If you look at just the two screenshots, just as an example, would you rather work with the green screen or something that looks more like a video game? Then finally, our data was growing. There was no way that our existing infrastructure would support the ongoing business demand. When we looked at solutions for our data warehouse, we're really looking at 4 components. So the DBMS and the box itself, the ETL, the BI stack, and collaboration integration. Looked at Netezza, Oracle, Data Allegro, and SQL Server. Initially, Netezza was our first choice. The performance of Netezza is outstanding, very fast. Oracle, we had to look at that. All of our core systems, new core systems, are Oracle. It made sense to see if Oracle Data Warehouse integrated well with the other products. And when we look closer at appliances, Data Allegro looked like a good solution. It was very similar to Netezza in performance, but it was more of an open source, open platform system. And the problem there was that Microsoft purchased Data Allegro. So as we looked more intensely at SQL Server, Microsoft they took the Data Allegro model of the appliance architecture and applied that to SQL Server. So what we saw in the fast track data warehouse reference architecture, the same kind of performance that Netezza promised. We did a proof of concept. We got a box from HP, a small box, to show us what the performance looked like, and it was extremely fast. On the ETL side, we looked at Informatica, ODI, and SSIS. Informatica is an expensive ETL tool, requires specialized knowledge and training. Very similarly, ODI, we actually did purchase ODI to help us integrate our different Oracle applications and systems. But again, it was a very complex tool to use, required specialized training, specialized folks. And then SSIS, much easier tool for us to use. And we actually have ended up using SSIS to integrate the different Oracle systems rather than using the ODI ETL tool. From a reporting layer on BI, again, we looked at Oracle BI. We do own MicroStrategy, and we use it today. It's a nice tool, but it has licensing limitations. Looked at Cognos and the Microsoft BI stack. The Microsoft BI stack integrated better with SharePoint and the rest of our infrastructure. And then from a collaboration integration infrastructure, we did at one point deploy WebSphere, WebSphere portal. That was another expensive proposition. It never really got off the ground, and we replaced it with SharePoint. So even before choosing our data warehouse platform, we already had SharePoint deployed in the organization. In terms of the cost, so this is a first-year cash outflow for a new data warehouse. Netezza came out at about $1.3 million, Oracle at 1.6, SQL at 800,000, and DB2 at 1.2. So if you look at our at the data growth, initially our data warehouse was at about 7 terabytes on the I-series. When we moved that to the fast-track data warehouse, we compressed that down to 2 terabytes. Today we're at about 4.5 terabytes compressed, and we're still growing. Had we stayed on the I-series, we would have been at about 14 terabytes. Just the disk space to host 14 terabytes would have been prohibitive. And as we said in the video, DB2 on the 400 had a limitation on table size and also number of rows. We did exceed that at one point, and that brought down that data warehouse for a couple of weeks. It took us 2 weeks to recover from that. Our processing times, which again used to be 1 to 3 hours daily, are now running at about 1 hour or less every morning. And our weekly loads, which took from 10 to 18, 20 hours, we've reduced that now to 3 to 4 hours. And our report that run and the caching, we reduced that from 6 to 12 hours to about 3 hours. Finally, our data backups, which used to take about 6 plus hours, we've reduced that now to 2 hours. And comparatively, the restoration times are very similarly about a third of the time. Sir? What was the reason for going from 7 to 2? The compression on SQL, on the data warehouse, it compresses the data. On the 400, it was not compressed. So this is what our infrastructure looks like today. Our data warehouse is SQL Server 2008. We host both SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2007. Anything that's coming out of our BI reporting, BI stack, is going through 2010. The rest of our organization is on 2007, and we are in the process of migrating the entire SharePoint stack to 2010. Our analysis services are on SQL 2008 R2. Our retail stock ledger is about to run on our analysis services. So by retail stock ledger, I mean our S-base cubes used to run on the I-series. We migrated off to Oracle, running on SQL Server. Now we're moving those cubes to purely to be on SQL Server analysis services. And then our point of sale, our retail merchandising, merchandise financial planning are all running on Oracle version 13. Our financial and HR systems are still running on the iSeries, but their days are numbered. And just so you're aware, we are leveraging BizTalk for some of the ETL and a lot of the integration in our IT infrastructure. I'm going to hand it over to Kevin to talk about some of the benefits.
I have a question.
Sure.
What type of hardware are you running your fast track on the data warehouse?
Our production box is a HP DL785. That box is, I think HP has replaced that with a 790 or 795.
Is that an AMD?
Yes.
And what about your SSA?
AS is running on a virtual HP. I don't know the exact hardware for that.
So I want to start by talking about some of the user benefits that we've seen and then go into a little bit around our process and strategy components, and then some of the additional kind of how Steinmart's move forward and how all of this affects us going forward.
Just one more question on the hardware.
Sure.
What was the timeline, how much staff did it take to go from the iSeries to the SQL Server?
How long did it take to move it? The forklift took about 2 weeks. So we basically forklifted the data, brought it over, had 2 weeks of conversion issues with date formats, those kind of things. It then took about 5 to 6 months to convert those custom ETL jobs to SSIS. That's what took the longest. How many people? I believe there were about 5 people. We used Pragmatic Works to do that conversion of the ETL jobs to SSIS.
All right, so looking at user benefits, really we're going to talk about 3 things. We're going to talk about a single point, which really we're looking at SharePoint there from that standpoint, how this affects and works across the enterprise, and then also reducing Excel usage. Those are our 3 kind of key benefits. First one being single point. As I mentioned, we're discussing SharePoint here. And it's the fact of getting above BI, so being able to take a step out of a BI application and into SharePoint and tie it to the process, and then also being able to track usage across environments. So if we look at single interface, it's a matter of grouping tools together. So whether it's Performance Point, SSRS, Office documentations, PDF, we can bring all this together into one environment and link things together. So once again, we're taking that step above BI and not forcing users to go into an application. It allows us to tie to the rest of the business functions into their process, and also allows us to link to additional information. And really what we're talking about here is documentation. And what you see on the left on the screen, I guess it's on your right, on the right-hand side of the screen, really is kind of a launching point that in all of our dashboards and all of our reports that we're releasing, you can click on to get to kind of that high-level detail of what they're looking at. The additional information that we link to, as you can see on the right-hand side, are things like quick reference guides, so training materials are at their fingertips, a business data dictionary, so that if they have a question in regards to what makes up sales, for instance, they can click 2 clicks away from finding that information out and also linking to other reports that contain that same information. So really, instead of going into finance's folder to look at their reporting, we have the ability for them to link across and really make it a lot more interactive and start down that path of becoming pervasive. And we can link it to standard operating procedures. So if we look at a business process, step 3 might be look at individual report and complete analysis and move on to step 4 of their process. We can link all of that through SharePoint, which is a great benefit. And we can link across the enterprise. So as the nifty little graphic shows, finance and merchandising can look at the same information, and not just a centralized repository of data, but literally the same report, which is helping to reduce redundancy. I don't have to have the team create a separate report that is 1 field off, or 3 different reports that really just contain 1 different field, 1 for supply chain, 1 for merchandising, and 1 for finance. But instead, I can group those together into logical grouping of information and share that across the enterprise and link to it separately through SharePoint. Because of the fact that everything is connected into SharePoint, we're not going into a separate application, we have access to a lot of information with SharePoint 2010 regarding usage, which helps us to define and design going forward what reports, how people are using them, how often they're using them. And one of the things that we found by doing this is that when we first launched our store dashboard, we had less than 50% of the stores using the tool, which isn't unusual for a BI implementation that your user initially, you see a spike and it dwindles off as people go back to their old way of doing things. But by using this tool and being able to track it, we could find out why, what components they were using, and improve our performance to the point that we're now tracking to about 90% of the stores on a daily basis go into the dashboard. Of course, our goal would be to get to 100%, but yeah, at least we're moving in the right direction. And what we do with the SharePoint 2010 information is we dump this into an SSAS cube that allows us to slice it and dice it any way that we need. So across the enterprise, we talked a little bit about the silos of individual groups, but it's also a matter of developing information for the masses and a broader audience because it's easier to use. So I no longer have to worry about just my 10 power users in the organization will use the tool set, but also I have assistant managers in stores that can use the tool set very easily. It allows us to break down silos and link processes, as I mentioned earlier. Breaking down silos, really, we're looking at three different things. So one is cross-functional. It's finance and supply chain being able to use the same information for inventory in the same reports. But it's also cross-source. So I can bring information in from our GL, combine that from information from our retail management system and our data warehouse into one report or one series of dashboards. And then cross-job, and I think I might have made this up when I put the presentation together, but what I mean by this is the effect of within our retail organization, my assistant managers are using the same information as a regional VP. So there's no longer that question of, well, in the store they get X report, and my regional VP at a corporate office gets something completely different that hopefully has the same information. Instead, they're looking at the exact same dashboard across the enterprise and across jobs to allow them to see the same information. Granted, they can do analysis. A regional vice president is going to want to aggregate that information, but they can do that within the same dashboard. So can the store managers. So this concept of linking to process and not forcing them into a process too long with BI, I mean, in 15, 20 years, BI has really forced individuals to go into a tool set. Well, if you want to report, launch this application, go into this folder, pull up the report, hope that looks the same as what you had on your green bar report 20 years ago, but hopefully at least being online, that's really a nice thing. But it forces them out of their process, which of course affects adoption. So instead, by integrating this together and tying it into their process, it allows that, as I mentioned, getting to that pervasive BI, which of course is what we want to achieve, even looking at that first chart, where the right is, how do you get to the concept of pervasive BI? So reducing Excel usage, and I have to say, I put the slide in here before I realized that Microsoft was going to talk about how much they're putting in Excel from a BI perspective, even in their keynote. But it's two different things. I'm not talking about reducing the Excel usage from a BI front end to a source data. That's perfectly acceptable. The challenge that we ran into is the fact that we would have people take MicroStrategy reports and dump them into Excel, make manipulations, bring in external data, send it throughout the organization, and really have nothing that would say that, yeah, that information is correct. It was unaudited, unsecured, and really remove the benefit of a single source. But as a lot of IT people will tell you, Microsoft Access is a challenge once in a while too. But the challenge really comes down to us in IT and in BI to find out how we can better serve the business community. When you look at why people use Excel, it's because they need to do their job, whether that's in finance, whether it's in merchandising. They're going to use whatever tools they can to get the job done. So it's our job to make sure that we can provide them with BI tools that help their process, as opposed to forcing them to use a different tool. And so by bringing in the entire Microsoft BI suite, we have that capability. Because they don't have to dump to Excel, they have the functionality in the BI tool set. It's not a training hurdle to get into a BI application. they can use SharePoint and they're familiar with it from a collaboration standpoint. So it's not just about the technology. And this is, 10, 15 years ago, there was always that silver bullet that if you were in BI, it was just wait till the next business objects release. Or if you had business objects, wait till Cognos came out with a new product. Well, we've kind of gotten past that, and we've learned that really everybody talks about a three-legged stool around people, process, and technology. I think the part that's missed there is the strategy. And at Steinmart, we're focused on the people and process. Strategy is something that we're starting with. As Alon mentioned, we have a major ERP implementation that we're going through now, and so a lot of our BI strategy is on hold while we complete about 100 different operational reports to move that last component off of the AS400. So if we look at people from a BI perspective, we really have 4 groups of individuals. We have technical leads, BI developers, data architects, and BI analysts. From a technical lead perspective, this is really the master of all trades. So they need to understand the entire BI stack, really be the central point, the escalation point for the organization and for my developers, and own and manage the standards as well as the strategy. So they have these individuals have a large job in front of them that they need to handle and be that central point. But what that allows is our developers, we've actually gone out and brought in people who aren't jacks of all trades, but are masters of individual components. And I promise I'll stop using that phrase. But really it's a matter of, I can bring an individual that knows SSAS and MDX, and that's their strong suit. I can bring in an individual that knows performance point. I don't have to look for people that have the entire BI stack. Helps us when we're looking for people, makes them a lot easier to find. But some of the critical components we look for is that they have to be self-starters, and they have to have pride of ownership. And too often, that's a challenge, because it's hard to find people that want to own their code, own the task, and be able to escalate issues and ask for help when needed. And we've got, from a data architect perspective, we actually have one individual that's been with the organization for about 14 years, and she knows the operational side as well as the data warehouse, which is critical. In addition to that, we've brought in 2 data architects that focus on our RMS implementation that understand those 1,300 tables as well as the data warehouse, so they can bring things together. So we can use those 3 individuals as kind of our data owners and pivot point of information. The BI analysts, meanwhile, are focusing on, this is really the hard position to fill. We have 5 BI analysts currently, and it's a little bit of the Renaissance person that they have to be part PM, part business analyst, and also understand BI. The first 2, there's a lot of people out there. Not too many good ones, that's kind of hard to find, but there's a lot of people out there. But to bring in the knowledge of business intelligence to that makes it a challenge. And they have to be able to understand a BI process, what we're looking to achieve, be able to be a focus point for the business. So this is a person that's going to talk to our C-level folks, to our vice presidents to get their requirements. And they're also the central point of the developers. So they have to understand the technology well enough and the BI stack well enough that they can translate requirements. They can make sure that we don't sign up for 100 things that we can't do with the technology or in the time frame. So really they have to have that broad knowledge, and it makes it hard to find those individuals. Around process, really I want to talk about 3 individual components. One is methodology, the second is testing, and then the third is some of the other keys that we've uncovered through our implementation. From a methodology perspective, we use the waterfall as kind of a framework. So we use the requirements, our timelines are based on waterfalls, but the problem with the waterfall methodology, it really never has worked for BI. It's too much of an iterative process. The business needs to look at their individual reports, they're going to list requirements, and then need to come back and make adjustments. From a development perspective, obviously we want to make tweaks based off of performance. So the waterfall methodology has just become a bit too structured. So what we've done is we've taken a couple key components of the Agile methodology, we've brought that in to make an iterative build. So the way our build works is that we don't have a structured design. We go from requirements into a high-level design review, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. And then we move into a build, followed by unit testing and client review. And the client review allows the business to have a quick response, to see the information, for our developers and our technical leads to be able to make the adjustments on the fly and spin it back out, so that really it becomes as quick of a development cycle as possible. And we use the Scrum components in a series of sprints to, we don't do it daily, we do it about 3 times a week, 15-minute scrums, that we bring together in order to quickly identify issues, keeps the developers on track. You know, I started out as a developer, and it's really easy to look at, you know, the mountains of components that need to be developed and not be able to focus on really what needs to be done for today. And so by bringing the Scrum process in, it allows that focus. Everybody knows what they should be working on today. Tomorrow they can make the statement of where they're at, and it helps us to also identify issues and any sort of components and problems that we run into. The other benefit is that our BI analysts always know the status. It's not just a weekly thing that a status report goes out. If the business contacts them on a Tuesday, they know where every single task is, what's ahead, what's behind, what the roadblocks are, all because of bringing in the Agile methodology and the Scrum component. So looking at testing, unit testing was a huge issue. As Alon mentioned, I've been at Steinmart for a little bit less than a year, and when I came in, we had developers that, they're still there, so our developers focused on turning out code as quickly as possible, but it wasn't always accurate. It was a lot of, I built the code, it works, handing it over into system testing and running into issues. And so we've really talked to our developers and got them in the mode of owning that code, being responsible for it, and having that pride of ownership so that they make sure when it goes into system test, their code is as solid as it can be and they're comfortable with it. And to do this, one of the tools that we brought in place is a traceability matrix where they actually sign off on each individual build component before we move into system test. And because of the challenges that we had with unit testing up front, we had to use scripted system test, which, I don't know, those that are familiar or have written system test scripts or testing scripts, it's not an easy process. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort. But the benefit that it provided us is with limited unit testing, it allowed the individual developers and the leads to go through a process to cast the net as wide as possible to get as accurate of information as we could. And that was, the nice thing is that now that we've got the unit testing kind of figured out, that we can remove those scripts from the system testing process and get into more focusing on the system test more traditionally. And so we have our technical leads and data architects that are responsible for it. And they're really looking at the complete picture. So they're looking at the source information, the data connections, making sure that if I'm in a QA environment, I'm connecting to my QA components and not across dev or production. They do a high-level data validation before we move into UAT. And of course, all of this is to get to match our standards, match our requirements, and make sure that we can produce as good of a product as possible. And then UAT, we still use the scripting method. A lot of people do UAT around pilots. You know, they do we got through system testing, the code's completed, the dashboard's ready, let's roll it out, give it to the business for 2 weeks and see what happens. Which is great for those 2 weeks because they always sign off on it. The challenge is that 2 weeks later or a month later, you get the phone call or the email that says, hey, there's a problem, we're having a challenge, this isn't what I expected. And so by using scripts, we put that ownership back on the business and allows a more accurate implementation. So some of the other keys that we ran into. The first one is a design review. So we put in a design review. One of our challenges early on was the fact that our developers would end up doing calculations based off of what they were comfortable with. So I mentioned that we can hire people that are really masters of individual components. But what that looked like is that if I had a person that was an RS developer, all the calculations they would put in the front end. Nothing would go into SSAS or into the data warehouse. So by putting a design review together, they come into a meeting. It's a 1-hour session. They don't really come with any prepared documentation. They just become prepared to discuss what they're going to use for source, how they're going to handle any data manipulations, and those calculations. It takes an hour, and it's improved greatly our overall BI performance. Once we're done with build, prior to going to system test, we brought in a code review. And this is really the first time that the developers who didn't work on the project can see what was developed, why it was developed certain ways. see the documentation, and also our BI analysts use this time to confirm that the requirements were met based on what was delivered. The third one that we ran into that we didn't have a lot of that we're starting to add is documentation. And this is, this is one of those things that I'm sure if I took a poll around the room, not too many people like documentation. I think it's, everybody hates doing it, but it's definitely beneficial. And we use it to cross-train, so we get a benefit from it right out of the gate. But we also see the benefits long-term. And we use an overall system documentation and then separate that for SSIS and AS into separate components. Because of the fact that I can use, my IS pieces in a larger, more than one report, more than one dashboard, we have that as a separate documentation, and we link to it in the overall documentation. And we also have our scheduling information there. But also from an SSAS perspective, it's a separate document that we create. It contains all of our calculation details and as much information from a dimensional perspective and a fact perspective for source that we can get. And one of our other large keys is working with the business. Years past, it was a lot of we work with the business, they define the requirement, we go in and following a waterfall, do our design, do our build, and then hope that the product that comes out when we go into UAT matches their needs. But by working with the business, by doing this iterative build, it's allowed us the ability to kind of combine that pride of ownership. Allows a better communication with the business, which helps us achieve better results. So now if there's a question, it's no longer, well, it's IT's fault that the project's behind because X, or it's the business's fault because they haven't reviewed the report in 3 weeks. Instead, that line of communication's open. We talk through it. If there's a challenge, we meet that challenge head on and work with it together. So what about strategy? The three things here, and this is at Steinmart what we're kind of marching towards. The three components or three tools are road mapping, storyboard, and a business intelligence competency center, or BICC. And the roadmap really we use, we're in the process of creating for a map of the strategy for a 6-month, 1-year, and 3-year type look. It defines several periods out and allows us to facilitate a phased approach, which is critical because it allows the business to see what's next in the implementation, what their next steps are, and allows that question of how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time. They can start seeing those individual bites. And meanwhile, it gives them time to use the tool. So if we release a dashboard, we don't have to worry about them not wondering what the functionality is or where they go from here, or getting a report and realizing 2 weeks later that, gosh, this is great, but now that I can see the technology, there's really 3 other things I want to add. With using a phased approach, we can add those 3 things to the next phase, allow better solutions and better responses. And it also allows us, from a technical perspective, to bring in a lot of controls around data management and data quality. A storyboard is simply a communication tool and a matter of helping with navigation. So we actually can map out. We use this tool to show screenshots, mock-ups of our individual reports, but also how they link together in SharePoint, how I'm going to access reports, how I can go from an individual report that maybe contains budgetary information to a report that contains last year or year-over-year comparisons, and allows them to kind of see in the business to take a look at how things, how items look, how they're going to look in the future, and to give them more of an idea of what their 5 fields they need on a report are going to look like. And the BICC is really a grouping of individuals focusing on standards and developing priorities. And so as we bring that group together, we're really looking at 10 to 12 people across the organization. It becomes a central point for the business with an IT representative as well. And it helps to guide the decisions. So we're not looking for those 10 people to be analysts, and we're not looking for them to be all of our C-level or VPs. Really, the idea is for them to be managers and directors, so they understand their functional area well enough, but are also empowered to make decisions. And this is critical to success because that way they make the call around what reports need to be next, as well as what our standards are. And for standards, it allows us to centralize things like layout, look and feel, and data sources. And I put methodology on there not because I'm expecting the BICC to understand and agile methodology and come to the table and say, all right, right now you use agile methodology for your build. We've been talking about it. We read a book and went to a conference. You need to use agile across your entire methodology. That's not what we're looking for, but what we are looking for is them to help bring in information, them to provide feedback, for instance, on user acceptance test scripts, them to be there so as we go through and start developing the UAT scripts, that they can help provide that information that we need to give them a day in the life of. And prioritization is critical. You know, not a week goes by, hardly a day goes by, that we don't have to push some sort of reporting off because of, you know, a request that's made when we're focusing on other critical components. By having a BICC that can focus on those priorities, it allows them to make the call. What's best for the business? What should we be working on as a team? So looking at results, the results really are around how did the Microsoft BI stack help Steinmark create an information-based culture, and how do those tools impact the business? And here we have a little, like we did on a prior slide, before and after picture, the left side showing, you know, very much a black and white basic report, and the right showing really just one quadrant that we have in a dashboard. So in the video, you saw larger pictures of the dashboard. This just gives you one example, but a lot more information on the same real estate, a lot easier to see, allows for quicker decisions. And that's really how the BI stack has helped us become an information-based culture. By using SharePoint, we have that central component that people can start out with. We have central point of data for enterprise. We can create links across various items. If we go to roll out, when we're ready for a report to go into SharePoint, it's not a drama. It's not, I've got to wait, you know, 3 days, I've got to train 10 people. It's instead a matter of quickly adding the links, linking reports together so that it really ties to the business process and that flow. And by having it be easy to use, I don't have to worry about training issues. I have a lot higher adoption rates, and we can use the same reports, whether it's, you know, simple or complex, from my entry level, like I mentioned, my assistant managers, all the way to my power users. They can use the same information and link together. So how do they impact the business? Really, it comes down to quicker decisions. So from a mobile access perspective, we have a lot of our C-level folks are starting to use mobile devices. Right now, it's the iPad. We're looking at bringing the slates into our store as well. And the concept there is just being able to make quick decisions to access that information on a sales floor, as opposed to having to go in the back room and see how they're performing. It allows that access to more live data, whether that they're at the corporate headquarters, whether I have a district director who is in his home office, or I have somebody at the corporate level. It allows that availability across the enterprise. It also allows improved insight because, once again, I can combine information. I can combine e-commerce and store data. I can combine finance and supply chain information. And they can see data in different ways than what they're used to. It's no longer the, hey, here's the same report that you're used to using for the past 30 years. Now it's online. Instead, it's how should you look at the information? What is the best approach? And start asking those questions. And then easy access. As I mentioned, you know, not to have yet another hit on Excel, but we no longer have to have Excel junkies. I don't have those 10 power users that have to know Excel in order to use the BI tool set because that's where they're dumping information into. Instead, they can go into SharePoint, collaboration tool that they're familiar with, and things are available first thing in the morning. So what used to be a report that was running all night and all weekend in MicroStrategy, we've converted some of those to Microsoft, and they're available at 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. in the morning. So there is a danger to all this, all the benefits that were talked about. And the danger is really that a lot of people are looking at the BI department and are looking at the information, which means that it has to be accurate. And that's a challenge. You know, anybody in any organization will tell you that data quality is always a challenge, making sure that you're looking at the right information and that it's accurate. And because it's on the fly and it's quick and easy to see, you also can kind of enable this snap decision mentality of, well, I looked at this and it looks like my sales in men's shoes or men's pants are down, therefore I better, you know, find a way, put up new signage, something of that nature, where really it could just be an off day, or it could be the fact that they pick up later in the afternoon. So that's one of the challenges. And then one of the biggest challenges is the interaction between my team and upper management. So while we do have the BI analyst as kind of being that face of BI, we still have, you know, my CAO, for instance, knows a handful of my developers and has no problems, you know, calling them up and saying, hey, where are we at on this project? Which is a little bit of a nervous thing from my perspective. But it's also good because there is that line of communication that's open and working. And probably the largest danger really has to do with resource availability. I've got a team of about 15 or 20 people. And the challenge that we run into is the fact that, like I said, there's always more reports. You know, I've got a list of projects that people want completed. I've got dashboards that I go into meetings and people literally look at me and say, oh, we got to talk. I'm, you know, with supply chain and I need a dashboard to track my information. I don't have one today. Well, unfortunately, on our radar, where we're at on our roadmap, that's a year out. But that's a hard conversation to have. So demand is greater, and I guess the biggest danger is, you know, as we go through, we find out that you're definitely going to be busy, which I guess is good for job security, but it means that we're always swamped. Any questions? Oh, sorry.
So your solution is catered toward IT actually delivering the BI for the user, not self-service?
It isn't. We're looking towards self-service. That's down our path. The problem is, the problem that we run into, we mentioned we have MicroStrategy. Right now we have 40,000 reports that are ad hoc in MicroStrategy. So our challenge now is to get information out to the business as quickly as possible and then look at more of a self-service mentality. But the challenge with that is going to be, how do you get the right parameters in place so we don't run into the same 40,000 reports that we have today, but instead can focus on, once we see 3 reports that are using the same information, how do we more centralize that and make sure it's the right information and served up to a broader audience based on that need? So that's definitely something we're looking towards.
How are you doing that analysis, determining whether reports are similar or not?
That's a good question. That's one of the things that here in the conference I'm hoping to find out, kind of some of those central things. A lot of it's going to focus on our BICC, so from a non-technical perspective, and having them bring it, and also that communication. So as a team, we have individuals that meet with our key business areas on a weekly basis, and hoping for them to provide a lot of that information. But yeah, that's definitely going to be a challenge. Yeah.
You were able to convert your existing resources to new technology, or bring people in?
So the BI team was what, 1 person before we brought in? So it was a small.
Yeah, the BI and data warehouse team was essentially 1 person with, you know, a lot of support. And since, now, as Kevin mentioned, he's got about 20 people. So we did bring a lot. Now, when we built the BI program, the initial thought was that we would have a BI manager and roughly 3 analysts, and then a kind of a contractor force of developers, report writers. What happened is, as we were implementing our ERP system, new point of sale system, a lot of what was our original BI roadmap of, you know, the pervasive BI, the self-service BI, the cubes, the dashboards, was kind of set aside to help meet the business demand for new reports for the new ERP system, for the new point of sale system. So we've had to ramp it up to that high number, not so much for our BI roadmap, it's more of to build those operational reports. That's why it's such a big, inflated number at this right now.
Two questions. Are you doing any rollout? Secondarily, when you adjusted your agile and kind of tweaked out, obviously Scrum trajectory is a little bit different. How did that impact your Scrum and where your Scrum are?
So we weren't using the sprints before, so Agile completely is a new concept that we started about 3 months ago. The interesting thing there is that it took a while for people to get adjusted to it, especially from a developer perspective. But now that they are, it's a great benefit. I mean, our first Scrums ended up being 30 minutes instead of 15 minutes because everybody wasn't quite sure what to bring to the table to those discussions. But now we're seeing a bunch of efficiency. Rollup, we are using some. But we use actually various components depending on what piece we're looking at and what we're connecting to from source. Any other questions?
You kind of mentioned before that you had kind of an enterprise scheduler that you're using to kind of manage all these batch jobs that you're running. Is that the same scheduler you're using with the BI section? Something different?
You can probably talk.
Yeah, so before we were using what's called Robot Scheduler on the 400. Today we're using UC4, and that tool was actually selected almost for us. UC4 is heavily used to schedule all of the Oracle systems, the retail merchandising system, the merchandise financial planning systems. And as the decision was made to purchase UC4 for that system, we thought instead of buying yet another scheduler, we would leverage that. So we use UC4 to schedule our SSIS packages and the operations that are driving BI. We do use SQL Server Agent, but if you look at the complexity of the operation, we've got so many different systems. We have dependencies on when something runs on an Oracle database. We really need to use a change data capture utility. SSIS could have been a solution, but the group that implemented all of the Oracle systems, they did not want to use SSIS. They needed UC4. I'm sorry? Yeah, so it makes sense to use UC4. It does talk to SQL. It talks to the other systems.
Sure. More grid.
Are you available?
Yeah. To move them? No, 40,000, but I don't want to move them. I don't want to move 40,000 reports. I want to get rid of most of those reports. I want to focus and go through an inventory and go through the right process. Moving them, yeah, that's not a problem, but that's not the right approach.
And to address that, there's a company called Wipro. They actually have a tool which migrates MicroStrategy reports to reporting services. And Wipro, W-I-I-P-R-O, they claim that they can move roughly 70% of their reports, from MicroStrategy to reporting services using that tool.
Any other questions? All right. Housekeeping things. So you've probably seen this, but additional resource that are available with MyTechEd. Complete the evaluation, get a chance to win. And if you want more access about this information, there's a tag for it. Thanks.
Thank you.